Greetings, people of the internet. Welcome once again to Bowtie Talks. I, of course, am your excellent host, Luke Johnson, coming to you from my undisclosed location, Midwest USA. And October is finally over, which, of course, can only mean one thing. Christmas! No, I'm just kidding, No, it's way too early for that, people. And in fact, I hate it when people play Christmas music in grocery stores during this time of year. It's a month, people. We can wait. Anyway, as I was saying, Halloween is over, which, of course, can only mean one thing. Thanksgiving will soon be upon us. Thanksgiving means a lot to many people. To some, obviously, it means giving thanks. To others, it's a day to eat everything in sight, including the furniture. And to even more, it's seen as a day where you try to practice self-restraint. It's a day to practice restraint so you don't harm your relatives, no matter how stupid their opinions may be. And of course, the football game for those of you who enjoy watching overgrown men, and overpaid men, I might add, wear shirts 2 sizes too large and bump into each other, and toss a ball around for no apparent reason. And I'm sure that some of you out there are thinking, I wonder why we celebrate this. Well, that is what I'm about to tell you. So please hold on as we dive into the most American of holidays, Thanksgiving. Now, I'm sure that in school, most of us have all learned about the Pilgrims and their plight when they first came to what is now Massachusetts. However, as is the most case, in most things we've learned in school, there is more to the story. Now, to begin the story, I will have to take you back to the year 1620. In September of that year, a small ship called the Mayflower left Plymouth, England, carrying 102 passengers. An assortment of religious separatists seeking a new home where they could freely practice their faith, while others were lured by the promise of prosperity and land ownership in the quote-unquote New World. It was a tough journey, and many died while at sea. And the trip itself lasted 66 days until they dropped anchor near the tip of Cape Cod, far north of their intended destination at the mouth of the Hudson River. 1 month later, the Mayflower crossed Massachusetts Bay, where the Pilgrims, as they were commonly now called, began the work of establishing a village at a new place they called Plymouth, named after their home in England. And it should also be noted that the travelers did not call themselves pilgrims. Those who were seeking religious freedom called themselves saints, while those who were called saints called those who were not separatists strangers. The pilgrims' first winter at the new colony was brutal, and most of the colonists remained on board the ship, where they suffered from exposure, scurvy, and outbreaks of other contagious diseases. And in fact, only half of the Mayflower's original passengers and crew lived to see their first New England spring. In March, the remaining settlers moved ashore, where they received an astonishing visit from a member of the, okay, I'm afraid of mispronouncing it, so instead I'm just going to spell the word Abenaki tribe, who greeted them in English. Many days later, the man returned with another Native American named Squanto, a member of the Pawtucket tribe who had been kidnapped by an English sea captain and sold into slavery before escaping to London and returning to his homeland on an exploratory expedition. Squanto taught the Pilgrims, weakened by malnutrition and illness, how to cultivate corn, extract sap from maple trees, catch fish in the rivers, and avoid poisonous plants. And it should be noted that before this, most of the Pilgrims' crops had died. Squanto taught them how to fertilize them by planting a fish along with the corn seed. Squanto also helped the settlers forge an alliance with the Wampanoag, a local tribe which endured for more than 50 years and remains one of the few known examples of harmony between European colonists and Native Americans. Now you're all wondering, but Luke, when did the first Thanksgiving actually happen? Well, hold your horses, people. I'm getting to that. Dang, people can be so impatient sometimes. I feel like I'm back at the table fighting my brother for the first turkey drumstick. I'm sure that most of you out there with older siblings can relate to not get the piece you wanted. And now that leads us to sorry, I went off on a little tangent there. Oh yeah, right, the story of the first Thanksgiving. Well, in November of 1621, the Pilgrims' first corn harvest was successful, and Governor William Bradford organized a celebratory feast that invited a group of the colony's Native American allies, which included the Wampanoag chief Massasoit. However, the Pilgrims, or Saints as they called themselves, might not have used the term Thanksgiving, and the festival lasted for 3 days, as opposed to just 1 day as it is usually celebrated now. And what was eaten during the celebration, once again, is not exactly clear. However, this much we do know. The bill of fare probably did not include cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie. We'll get into the origin of these traditions later on. What may have been eaten, we must look at the writings of Pilgrim chronicler Edward Winslow, who wrote, "Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling, that so we might after a special manner rejoice together, after we had gathered the fruits of our labor. They four in one day killed as much fowl as with a little help besides served the company almost a week, at which time, amongst other recreations, we exercised our arms, many of the Indians coming with us, and amongst the rest their greatest King Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted, and they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed on our governor, and upon the captain and others. And although it be not always so plentiful as it was at this time with us yet, by the goodness of God, we are so far from want that we often wish you partakers of plenty. And some historians have suggested that many of the dishes were likely prepared using traditional Native American spices and cooking methods, because the Pilgrims had no oven and the Mayflower sugar supply had greatly diminished by the fall of 1621. The meal most likely did not feature pies, cakes, or other desserts, which have become a hallmark of contemporary celebrations. Pilgrims held their second Thanksgiving celebration in 1623 to mark the end of a long drought that had threatened the year's harvest and prompted Governor Bradford to call for a religious fast. Days of fasting and Thanksgiving on an annual or occasional basis became common practice in other New England settlements as well. And during the American Revolution, the Continental Congress designated one or more days of Thanksgiving a year. And in 1789, George Washington issued the first Thanksgiving proclamation by the national government of the United States. And in the proclamation, he called upon all Americans to express their gratitude for the happy conclusion to the country's War of Independence and the successful ratification of the U.S. Congress. His successors, John Adams and James Madison, also designated days of thanks during their respective presidencies. And so the holiday known as Thanksgiving remained largely regional, being celebrated almost exclusively in the northeastern United States. And in 1817, New York became the first of several states to officially adopt an annual Thanksgiving holiday. However, each state celebrated it on a different day, and to the southern United States it remained largely unfamiliar. It was seen as a purely Yankee holiday. Dang Yankees. So now you must be thinking, well, then how did the holiday spread? Well, for that, we have two people to thank. Would you believe that the old poem, Mary Had a Little Lamb, has a connection to Thanksgiving? I'll get into that in a moment. We have one woman to thank for both Mary Had a Little Lamb and Thanksgiving becoming a national holiday. Sarah Josepha Hale was a prominent writer. She had written the children's poem Mary Had a Little Lamb in 1830 and helped found a magazine called the American Ladies Magazine, which she used as a platform to promote women's issues. In 1837, she offered the editorship of Godey's Lady Book, where she would remain for more than 40 years. Miss Hale was a New Englander, being born and raised in New Hampshire, and grew up regularly celebrating an annual Thanksgiving holiday. And in 1827, she wrote a novel called Northwood, A Tale of New England, that included an entire chapter about the fall tradition. Now, as I stated before, the holiday known as Thanksgiving was already very popular in New England. However, it had failed to reach a national. And while working at Godey's, Miss Hale often wrote editorials and articles about the holiday, and she lobbied state and federal officials to pass a legislation creating a fixed National Day of Thanks on the last Thursday of November. She believed that such a unifying measure could help ease growing tensions and divisions between the northern and southern states, and her efforts paid off. By 1854, more than 30 states and U.S. territories had a Thanksgiving celebration on the books, but Hill's vision of a national holiday remained unfulfilled. And how did Thanksgiving finally become a national holiday? Well, believe it or not, we have the Civil War to thank. The year was 1863. In July of that year, the Battle of Gettysburg resulted in more than 50,000 American deaths. And so on October the 3rd, 1863, my favorite president and main man, Abraham Lincoln, made a proclamation which he hoped would help unite the states in some way. I do therefore invite my fellow citizens in every part of the United States to set apart and observe the last Thursday of November next as a day of Thanksgiving. And I recommend to them that while offering the ascriptions justly due to him, they do also with the humble penitence for our national preservedness and disobedience commend to his tender care all those who have become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in the lamentable civil strife in which we are unavoidably engaged, and fervently implore the interposition of the Almighty hand to deal with the wounds of the nation, to restore it as may be consistent with divine purposes to the full enjoyment of peace, harmony, tranquility, and union. And this proclamation is viewed as the beginning of the national holiday of Thanksgiving Day. It was one of 9 similar proclamations that Mr. Lincoln issued during the Civil War. However, while he did issue the proclamation, he did not author it. That was Secretary of State William Seward. And this was also because of Sarah Josepha Hale, as I stated before. She launched a letter-writing campaign to support the cause, and finally, on September 28, 1863, she wrote right to President Lincoln, asking him to use his powers to create the holiday. And so her 36-year quest was finally fulfilled. Which now brings me to some of the Thanksgiving traditions and how they became Thanksgiving traditions. For turkey, we once again have Sarah Josepha Hale to thank. Like many of her contemporaries, she believed that the Pilgrims ate turkey at their first feast because of the abundance of edible wild turkeys in New England. Another reason is because turkey is very practical for serving to a large crowd. And also, turkeys are bigger than other birds raised or hunted for meat, and it's also cheaper to produce a turkey than cattle or pigs. As I said, the first Thanksgiving meal most likely did not feature pumpkin pie because sugar was practically gone by then, and so desserts were definitely off the table. It is possible that the natives did bring pumpkins to the settlers, as they were, in fact, native to North America. However, they most likely did not use them for pies because, as I said before, sugar was scarce, and it may have taken a bit longer for people to actually make them into desserts. But also, the first so-called pumpkin pies would not be pies as we know them today. They were actually hollowed-out pumpkins that were then filled with custard and then baked. The pumpkin pie that we know today came about in the 1700s, and it also became a regional tradition once again in New England. It was seen as a popular celebration dessert. And also, in her 1827 novel, Northwood, A Tale of New England, in the chapter dedicated to Thanksgiving, she did in fact mention pumpkin pie. So once again, we have to look to Sarah Josepha Hale for a lot of our Thanksgiving traditions. And to give you an idea of how seriously Thanksgiving is taken in New England, the town of Colchester, Connecticut once postponed its Thanksgiving feast for a week in 1705 due to a molasses shortage. They believed that there could be no Thanksgiving without pumpkin pie. However, in the South, they eat sweet potato pie on Thanksgiving because the sweet potatoes were easier to grow in southern soil. And I have to say, sweet potato pie is delicious. Good on you, southern states! Well, it looks like time's about up, folks. But before we leave, I'd like to thank the people at the National Park Service and the History Channel website for the information that I used in this episode. And with that, I think we can now end this. Goodbye, and God bless you all. And happy Thanksgiving!